So there's this hackneyed old expression, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? Which I think is bogus because you should just wish for invisibility and 3 more wishes. But what about this? What would you do if you knew you would fail? What would be worth doing even if you knew the outcome wasn't going to arise? Then we are free to do the work. And the irony is that the single best way to get the outcome you seek is to not obsess about the outcome. So one of the greatest jazz albums ever recorded, certainly one of the 3 best-selling jazz albums of all time, is Kind of Blue from Miles Davis. And how long did it take from the first note till they were done? And the answer is 3 days. 3 days, that's all it took from the beginning to the end. If you're in the studio and a high-pressure situation, there's a lot riding on it. Well, then you know what you're spending all your time doing? Reverse engineering for radio airplay, wondering about this edit or that edit, adding a little bit more reverb over here. You're becoming a perfectionist. Why? Because perfectionism isn't about being perfect. Perfectionism isn't even about being good. It's about hiding. You're so obsessed about the outcome, you forgot about the practice. You forgot to simply do the work, to merely do it without a lot of commentary and obsession about what's on the other side. And that will come through. And so, yeah, every once in a while, there's a Steely Dan that takes a year to make a record. But what we know is, as you enjoyed in listening to me slurping tea, that what we really want is someone who's going to show up as a human and say, here, I made this. And that's the magic of magic. That magic is not calculated. Magic is simply the result of us seeking to serve, but not getting obsessed at controlling your reaction to what I made.
Obviously, making art and making money doing that art is better than making art and not making any money and having to work at a place that you don't find fulfilling. We all know that it's possible to do both because you and I are both doing it. It's fulfilling much of the time. I won't say all the time. I'm sure there are bad days for anybody. But how do you balance this equation in your mind? A lot of these, the so-called gurus online, right? They say things like, follow your passion, just do what you love, the money will come later. Both you and I know that that is not necessarily true, right?
Definitely not.
Mean, we all want the fish, as you say in the book, with fly fishing. Everybody just wants the fish.
Yeah. All right. So let's start with the easy one, follow your passion. It's so much more reliable to decide to be passionate about what you do than to insist that you do what you're passionate about. And many of us have jobs that did not exist 20 years ago, but people were passionate then. So did something like, how did this happen? Well, it happened because people like you and I found new things to do and decided to be passionate about it. So that's the first piece of it. But the bigger issue that you're bringing up is only recently, like really, really, really recently, could you get paid to do something that feels like a hobby. That digging latrines or, cleaning the inside of somebody's mouth as a dentist, these are not, no one does those things as a hobby. But plenty of people have a podcast as a hobby. Plenty of people have a blog as a hobby. All of a sudden, hobbies are monetizable. And the first thing I want to say to people is think twice before you try to monetize your hobby, because it will stop being your hobby and it will start being your work.
The best way to ruin a hobby is to try to monetize it. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said. If you've got a decent job that's safe and secure, where you're paid fairly, I wouldn't quit it so fast, because you should just keep doing your hobby, which is you got, 40 hours a week off the clock. Go do your hobby. The minute you try to sell the work of your hobby, like my hobby is making canoe paddles out of cherry wood. If I sold a paddle, it would be all downhill from there. Because then I say, well, I wonder if I could sell 2 paddles. And then what does the market want? You get all hung up on this instead of the craft. So leaving that aside, can you make money from your art? Well, there are several things you can do. One thing you can do, which is another thing that has woken people up from my book and from the workshop, is you could be a hack. And I think there's nothing wrong with being a hack. So let's be really clear what a hack is. A hack is somebody who knows what the market wants and gives it to them. That's it. So James Patterson, best-selling author in America, is a hack, because book after book after book, He is not writing eye-opening literature. He is giving the market what it wants. And if you buy an Alex Cross novel, you're going to get an Alex Cross novel. Good for him. I got no shade to cast on the best-selling author in America. But he's also not asking people to look at him as a tortured soul who's right on the cutting edge and who's doing things that might not work. Because he's made it really clear. This is what you want. Here it is. And that's important work that makes our economy function. The first Alex Cross novel, that was art. Because that might not have worked. Because that was leaving a job at a fancy ad agency and leaning into the great unknown. That feels different. And you can sign up for one or the other, but you shouldn't get confused about which one is which. Because so let's think about, what's your favorite rock group of the 70s or 80s? Someone like the Doobie Brothers.
Oh, God. Can we say like Van Halen? They're top of mind right now.
Van Halen, right? Rest in peace.
Yes.
So when Van Halen was touring recently, they were playing covers of Van Halen songs. Because they weren't Van Halen anymore. They were a cover band who used to be Van Halen. Because in that moment, they were hacks. The crowd knew what they wanted to hear. The band knew they were there to give the crowd what they wanted. That's a fair deal, right? That's different than being on a cutting edge and saying, I'm exploring a frontier here, a frontier that has a lot of pieces in it that are unknown. To make a living at that requires a whole bunch of other things to happen. First, you have to understand genre. You have to understand what your work rhymes with. You can't copy it exactly. It's not generic, but it has to be in a category. And second, this is huge. You have to seek the smallest viable audience, not the biggest possible one, but the smallest one that can sustain you, right? So Talking Heads or Lou Reed playing at CBGB's, there's only like 120 people in the audience. But those 120 people are the right people there for the right reason. And then maybe they'll tell their friends and maybe it will grow. But if you start by saying, if we don't play Madison Square Garden, we're a failure, then you're going to have to try to reverse engineer everything. It's not going to get there. And so one of the curses that could hit your band if you're getting started is that you could be an opening act post-COVID for a big group. The opening act life is terrible. Because the people in the room aren't there for you. They're waiting for you to go away so that they can listen to who they want to listen to. So you're getting all this feedback from the wrong people. And if you can seek the smallest viable audience and delight them, that puts you on the hook. That lets you refine your craft. And then maybe you can get paid for your work.
What about people who feel completely drained in whatever they're doing? It doesn't matter if they are cleaning teeth or if maybe they're doing creative work. They just still feel totally burned out or drained or just completely lacking enthusiasm. How can we cultivate passion around our work or discover an occupation through which we can cultivate passion or enthusiasm? Or is that the wrong question?
No, no one's asked me that recently. It's a great question. So I'm going to divide it into two pieces. First of all, what is stress? Stress is wanting to do two things at the same time. Stay and go. Be quiet and be seen. Whatever two things there are. And so people are stressed at work because they don't want to be at work, but they want to get paid. That causes stress. If all day long you are stressed, it's really easy to lose any enthusiasm you have for anything. And then the second piece of it is what amplifies that. The reason you want to go is because you're afraid of something. You're afraid of being insufficient. You're afraid of doing a bad job. You feel like an imposter. So when we add all of that up, modern Western industrial work is filled with stress, it's enervating, and it kills passion because we want to do two things. We want to stay and we want to go. We want to get rewarded and we want to leave. And we're filled with fear and we feel like an imposter. So it's no wonder that there's so much dissatisfaction and ennui in the way we approach our work, which is why people who can't find a better path go home and self-medicate with Netflix or alcohol or whatever it is. And people who can go home and find a hobby or literature or something else that elevates them. And it feels to me like the opportunity is figuring out how to turn your work into something that's more of a choice, less stressful, and fills you with energy and joy. And we know that there are people who work in a steel mill who are happy doing it. And we know that there are people who turn in their books in on time without being punished by internal, you know, debate about writer's block and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference? And I think the difference is we begin with a choice, which is possibility. We are here and we can do something with our day. Not but and. And that's from Roz Zander. The idea of saying, I'm on vacation and it's raining means not that my vacation is ruined, but that I can catch up on my reading or I can take a cooking class. All these things I've been hoping to do. Whereas if I say I'm on vacation, but it's raining, I'm trapped. And so shifting our mindset toward possibility. Who can I touch? Even if it's just the person in the next cubicle. How can I bring humanity to today as opposed to just sitting in the tension and the stress? It opens the door for a better life.
The majority of people, like you said, go to school and through school having no idea what they should do. And reconnecting with your childhood passion seems like a really good way to at least get started on the path of figuring that out.
Well, the first chapter in Mastery was called Discover Your Life's Task. And so the first month of the Daily Laws is about that, the month of January, because it's really, if I had to say it, Jordan, it's the most important thing in your life right now, particularly if you're younger. You know, if you're in your 50s or 60s, it's getting a little bit late, I'm sorry to say, but it's never really too late. But if you're younger, man, that is the most important thing you can learn. I can't emphasize it enough because I have studied throughout my years and the thousands of books I've read for my research, biographies of the most successful, famous, creative people, and I've done consulting with people on the highest levels. So I've seen this firsthand, and I've done it in my research. And inevitably, these are people who understood at some point in life that this is what I was destined to follow. This is a path for me. Now, that path might have been, most people, it's like a zigzag. You don't have a straight line. This is what I was meant to do. It's never like that. It wasn't for me. But you kind of have an idea, and it becomes clearer and clearer, and you find that path, and it leads to so much power. You become so creative and so energized because you enjoy your work, you learn faster, you're engaged emotionally with what you're doing. It is so important. And a lot of people who were successful had a clear idea when they were 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Some people discovered it at the age of 12 or 18. Me, I really didn't discover it till I was about 35.
Is this 60 jobs later or 80 jobs later?
Probably 80 jobs later
Crazy.
when I got to write the 48 Laws of Power. But anyway, so it's not easy. And a lot of people get confused. And why do you get confused? Well, the psychologist Abraham Maslow, who studied a lot of children, for instance, he said that children, and you'll maybe know this with your 2-year-old, they have what he calls impulse voices. And these are voices that say, I like this, I don't like that. I like this kind of food, I hate this, I'm going to spit it out. Right? I like this person, I don't like that person. They're very clear. They know what they like and what they don't like. It's so obvious to them in an almost pre-verbal sense.
It's like binary. Yeah. It's
Right.
just, there's almost no lukewarm. With my kid anyway, he's either open-minded or it's not happening.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
really kind of on and off, and that's it.
That's exactly. So everyone had that because it's the nature of being an infant in this world, right? Because it's natural. It's a voice that's naturally inside all of us. And then as you get older, you start listening to Mr. Harbinger and Mrs. Harbinger telling you, don't do this, Jaden, do this. You know, this is what you should behave like this. Don't behave like that. And the kid starts getting a little confused. So I say, well, my voice tells me to do this, but I'm told not to do that. And slowly you go through a process where you're not hearing it anymore. You're hearing what teachers tell you. You're hearing what parents tell you. You're hearing what peers are telling you about what's cool, what's not cool. You're hearing what social media nowadays is telling you. I'm talking about like your career, what you were meant to do. And then you arrive, you're 18, 19 years old, and you haven't a clue because you can't hear that voice anymore. And you're going to try this, that, the other, not based on things that are deep inside of you, but based on what other people have told you you should do or what they think is cool. And you're going to end up trapped. You're going to end up choosing a career path that seems seductive and interesting and lucrative. And 5 years down the line, you realize it doesn't really interest me, and you hit a wall, and you go, fuck, man, what's going on with my life? You start maybe drink. I know I'm giving you a little exaggerated scenario here, but you start drinking.
I thought you were just narrating my exact life story, but continue. So far, it's spot on.
Well, you get addicted to online porn, on and on and on and on and on, right?
That's funny.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, and then you're 30, and then it's starting to get a little late,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so the problem is, how do you clear away all of that noise, that white noise that's drowning out your impulse voices, and actually hear what was your voice when you were 2 years old, right? And so it's a process. I've done it in consulting with people, trying to help them figure it out. People will say, Robert, I have no idea. So, I haven't a clue what I was meant to do in this world, right? You talk about my early childhood, I can't remember anything. Okay, so it's not, for a lot of people, it's not obvious or easy, and I understand that. But we go through a process, if I'm able to do that with them, online or in person sometimes, where we reconstruct some of the early memories of things that really excited them when they were a kid and things that they hated. And a book that I always recommend to people, it's on the shelf somewhere right behind you, I don't see it right now, called The 5 Frames of Intelligence by Howard Gardner. Really good book.
We'll link to that in the show notes.
Okay. The idea is, we normally associate intelligence with kind of book learning and intellectual learning, but he says there are 5 different kinds of intelligence, and each is equally valid and important. One of them will be obviously words and language, which is something that I was attracted to. Some of it will be with figuring out patterns, and leads to like a mathematician or somebody interested in statistics. Another one's a little more abstract. I can't remember which one that is, leads to like music. Then there's kinetic intelligence.
Like
where,
athletes.
Yeah, it's all about your body. And that's a very high form of intelligence. We don't think of it that way, but it is a form of intelligence. There's a social intelligence where it's all about people, right? And he makes the point that a child has one of those forms of intelligence that dominates inevitably. Some people might have another one that's kind of in the background, but one of them inevitably dominates in them, right? And if you choose a career that's not really in alignment with what you're naturally gifted for, your brain was wired in a particular way. It's genetic, okay? Right? And if you're not following that, forget it, you'll never get anywhere. So we go through a process of trying to figure out what is, just in the most general way, let's not get so specific about your actual career choice. What is that form of intelligence that you're inclined towards? It's not difficult. Were you really attracted to sports and movement? Do you find you're most joyous when you're like dancing or running, and that's what gets you excited and you think about that? Okay, well, that's probably in some ways where your brain is wired. Is it words and just the sound of words that kind of obsess you and fascinate you like it did when I was a kid? You should probably be involved in some form of writing, right? Okay, so we go through that process. What is your frame of intelligence? We kind of determine that. And then we kind of reconstruct certain key moments in your childhood where you did something and it felt right. Now, a lot of people don't have that. I maintain that everybody has it. You have to kind of dig. But you did something, and in the process of doing it, it felt like there was kind of an ease to it, as opposed to learning math when you don't like math. There's no ease involved, right? For some people, that ease is in math. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's kind of put our finger on that for a little bit, on and on and on. And then as we get older, I like to look at what people hate. So when I was 23, I discovered that I hated working for other people.
Well,
that's why I had 60-some different jobs.
And that makes sense.
I don't like the political games. I don't like all the bullshit. I don't like all the stuff, all the things you have to play and pretend. I'm an entrepreneur. It took me a long time to figure it out because I never had a job more than 11 months in my entire life. It took me time, okay, I should be working for myself because I don't like working for other people. So if we detect in this person that they don't like that, and that's a lot of people, I'm afraid, in the world today, you should be an entrepreneur. You should be working for yourself eventually. So that's part of the process that we go through. It's more complex than that, but that gives
Of
you an
course.
idea of what it's like.
I love this because when I was a kid, I learned how to build out of like little parts from Radio Shack an FM radio transmitter. And it was
Wow.
kind of interesting because I would solder these little things in. And my dad was a mechanical engineer and he goes, wow, I wonder if my kid's going to be an electrical engineer. And then when I built it and it didn't work, it was frustrating, but someone helped me fix it. And then I could transmit my voice to the radio, probably like, 50 feet away. And that was the part that was the most interesting. And I realized I didn't really care about making the thing as much as I cared about somehow being able to talk to my friends and things like that. So I wanted to turn the power up on this thing. And I learned that you could do that by illegal, like breaking federal law and attaching a high gain antenna.
And then communicating with the Russians.
Well, yes, yeah, accidentally communicating with the Russians. Yeah, this is like an 80s Disney movie or something like that, like Cloak and Dagger. But I wanted to be, I said, I want to be able to talk to everyone in the neighborhood on their radios. And they were like, that's super illegal. You can't do that. And my mom sort of put the kibosh on that project. Then I go through this whole path and I'm good at studying and I go through college and I get good grades and I decide I guess I should go to law school because more school is better. So then I become a lawyer, but I already knew I didn't want to become a lawyer. And then I start the podcast in my second year of law school and I end up on Sirius XM satellite radio. And then I quit law and I come back to this. And I didn't remember that when I was a kid, I wanted to be on the radio.
Wow.
I only remembered it probably 8 years plus after doing
That's
this.
a perfect example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I'd frickin' listened to myself, I could have gone to broadcasting school.
No.
Whatever,
Everything's for a reason. It was better that way. First of all, your law career taught you some interesting things that you're never going to forget.
That's true.
There's some skill sets that were created then. And then if you had found your way to podcasting too early, it wouldn't have the same meaning to you.
That's true.
Now you're so excited that you found the right thing because you kind of hated law and law school that it means much more, and you actually are more motivated to follow it through. Like if I had been offered to write a book when I was 24, instead as opposed to 35, 36, it would have never worked. I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the desperation, etc.
That makes sense. I mean, I didn't even get into podcasting because I thought it would be fun to do a show. I got into podcasting because I was recording a lecture of a course that I was teaching and I needed to put it online.
Wow.
And podcasting was the only way to put an MP3.
You've had like 80 different jobs.
Yeah, I mean, this was during law school. I was teaching a networking class, and I kept I'm giving them the same damn talk every week. I need to record it on my Sony minidisc player, take it, and then get it to my computer, make an MP3 file, and put it on the internet. But there was no SoundCloud, there was no YouTube, So my friend said, "Hey, there's podcasting. You can put these files online," and that was the birth.
What year are we talking about?
2006.
That was just the beginning of podcasting.
I think we were one of the first 800 or first 1,000 shows.
I can only remember my first podcast was like in 2008. And I was like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah, it's like a downloadable radio show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and here we are. So you're right. It sort of makes sense because if someone said, "Hey, you should start a podcast," I'd go, "Well, I'm not going to be some guy who records stuff in his basement. That's dumb." And then I did that for a long time, and here we are.
Yeah.
What do we do when we realize we've chosen the wrong career? Like if we just get up and we realize, look, I'm not just burned out, I'm not just tired, I'm doing something I hate. I've known it for years. I'm finally gonna do something about it. What is that thing that we do?
Well, one thing, just to backtrack a minute here, one thing I left out, the reason why you want to follow this path isn't just because it's some kind of mystical destiny sort of idea. The human brain works best, we learn fastest when we're emotionally engaged, when we're interested and excited by something. The brain opens up, we become like a sponge because we want to learn, and our attention is much deeper, and so we learn faster. So if you choose the wrong career for whatever reason, like you go to law school and you're kind of half listening as the professor's droning on, you're kind of half reading the books. Yeah. You're not involved in it, and so you're not learning fast enough, right? And if you don't learn fast enough, creativity, which is what we all want, is a function of the intensity of your knowledge, of the information you have absorbed. The faster you absorb information, the more thoughts and associations you create in the brain. It starts going all the time, and ideas are coming to you. If you take 5 years to learn something, that stuff going on in the brain won't happen. So that's why we want to do it. Okay, so you're going to find out in your career that you are not emotionally engaged, that isn't happening. The gears aren't connecting. You're tuning out. You're not paying attention, right? And you kind of realize that. Okay, so you have to be able to realize that. And not a lot of people are going through their 20s, for instance, because they're going after a big paycheck. And they're unaware that they're actually not really attuned to to what they're supposed to be learning. Okay, but once you have that moment, it kind of depends on how old you are. So there's not like a single formula for what you should do. So if you're 24 and you realize you made the wrong choice, that's great. Now we can go through a process and you can make a fairly radical shift in your career decision because you haven't wasted, I'm not saying wasted, that's too harsh a word, but you haven't spent 15 years in something not relevant to you. It's only been a couple of years. All right, let's go through the process of figuring out what you should do and let's kind of change your skill set, right? Let's start heading in towards that direction of what you were intended to do. You can make a more radical shift. But if you're in your 30s, I wouldn't recommend that because you need to make a living, right? You have learned things, you have learned certain skills. So what I recommend is not a radical shift, but a more subtle shift, heading more in that direction. And that might include keeping the job that you have, but at night going to school or online, learning some new skills that you now can quit. Your plan is to quit this job in 2 or 3 years, but you will have learned things that will allow you to quit and go on to this other path. Or you figure out a way to kind of shift it.
You've got this calendar audit exercise in the book, which I think is brilliant. It's something that I recommend people do in one form or another all the time. And essentially break down all your time, especially time spent flexing on Instagram or whatever, and like truthfully evaluate how much time is being spent going towards your goals and where the rest of the time is going. How do you decide which habits or activities or people that you need to cut out? Because not everything is going to be aimed towards your goals. Like sometimes you just have friends, but I assume you've got a rule of thumb for this kind of thing.
Right. Sometimes you just need to take notes of what's really going on. Okay, it's Monday to this Friday. This is what I want to do for 5 days. I'm going to take notes of everything I got going on. Basically, my business partners, what the conversation, let's just take notes. At the end of the day, look at what you did today. What did we do? What needs to be removed? What do I need to spend and focus more time on? You would be surprised at the bullshit that you got coexisting around you. The people that's calling you, the conversations that's going on, man, that shit is frivolous. Let's X that out and focus on what brings value to the table. Because 3 years from now, it's only certain things that's going to matter. The fluff, as you call it, I'm going to start using that, the fluff, that bullshit, we won't even remember that. The people that never really brought value to our lives, we won't even remember their names. So let's move 3 years ahead now and cut the bullshit out now. Let's move like we already advanced, and that's what we finna do. If I know I wanna, hey man, in the next 5 years, I may wanna start playing golf. You know what? I'm not gonna wait 5 years. We're gonna start this year. Let's start working on the putt.
You could do it inside that room you're in right now.
I know.
You could drive a golf ball in there.
I know. That's a great idea.
Maybe take down the chandelier, just because that's a disaster waiting to happen if you're going to be driving balls in the house.
No. I love the chandeliers. I may just have to get the 3 rows. The ones that hang down with the tri-levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got these a few years ago when we first was doing the first warm-up decoration, but it's time to go to another level, I think.
Yeah, you can definitely move those out of the driving range. I would say that's could be a little bit dangerous. But you're right. You do need to change how you invest your time in order for your results to change. And that's like the main takeaway from that, right? Like a lot of people will just complain about something, or they'll say, yeah, I got to do this. But if you just take inventory of your time, you realize, wow, I'm actually wasting like 2 hours a day in meetings, listening to people complain, whatever, solving dumb problems that shouldn't have happened.
Oh, man. And you get better and better, and then you'll be surprised in 3 months how your life has changed. You'll be surprised.
Ambition is the most important ingredient to success, which makes sense. Or at least that's what you say in the book, right? And I wonder if you found this. It's really easy to assume that other people have the same level of ambition as you do, but statistically, that's just not going to be true, right?
No, they don't. They don't. It takes a certain level of ambition. It takes a certain amount of ambition. And the more ambition you have, the more things you can overcome. There's actually people that want to be on radio. They actually want to be in the position you're in, but a lot of times they're shy. That'll be the word they use. Or, nah, but you may be shy too, but your level of ambition, fuck the shyness. This what we're going to do. I don't give a damn if we finna take a L. I don't give a damn. We gonna do it anyway. And then guess what? We gonna try our hardest and we gonna bring something great to the table. And we confident we gonna bring something great to the table. And that level of ambition is priceless.
I've done this with business partners. I'm sure you have too, where you think like, okay, I'm working 18 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, whatever it is. And you think like, all right, they're going to be up at Friday, 1 a.m. working, but they've been drinking since 2 p.m. the day before. They're putting more effort into their alcohol tolerance than they are into their business. And it's a lesson that a lot of people have to learn the hard way. Because like you grew up working hard. I grew up working hard. Most people actually do not.
And guess what? If that's the situation, once we sit down at the table, they're going to understand why their value isn't as high as mine or yours. That's one thing that we're going to make it clear. Whatever you bring to the table is what you will be appraised on. And you will be appraised. And not just, let's do this on a daily basis. What are you bringing to the table on a daily basis? Are you going above and beyond? Or are you that same person you've been for the last 3 years, just doing what's on black and white paper that's requested on you? If you are, to me, you're a loser. We want to go above and beyond. I want to go and do something else. I want to suggest another guest for you without you having to ask me. That's what we have to do for us to make it where we trying to go. And for the ones that don't understand, accept, or appreciate that, just accept, the position you're in and you'll stay in as we continue to climb.
You say you hire people for jobs that they can grow out of, not jobs they can grow into. Tell me about that.
Well, you just have to be a person that wants to elevate yourself. And that's me touching on the same thing once again. Are you going to be one of those people that's just a predictable colleague, a predictable peer, a predictable employee? Are you going to do the same thing you've been doing for the last 6 months? That's not cool. That's not the shit. That ain't what you want to be. Be one of those people that, hey, man, I don't know if you guys are like this, but I wrote this down. Pass this shit around. That's what I want to see. What is this? Even if it's 20 things that you suggested and I only like 2, guess what? You just increased your value with Ricky Rose. You know what? I may ask you to slide over. That person that's sitting in between me and you, move them. You sit next to me now. Just those 2 things on that paper. Don't be predictable. You got to be able to climb out. Don't grow into. You got to be able to go to another level. I don't want to have to do you a favor because I'm not going to do you a favor and give you the position. That's growing into it.
This makes sense, right? So no free meal ticket, but you will put your people on so that they can develop. And like you said, I love the idea of climbing out, right? It's like, all right, you're in this position and you're not
going to... What are you going to do next? You're in this position. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? You're in this position now. What are you going to do next? Okay, you're in this position. Once you've mastered this position, what are you going to do next? Are you going to remain the same person? Because if you are, you're boring me. And guess what? That's not exciting. And what's exciting is us going to the next level. And that's what I'm most definitely going to be doing. When you look around here, everything on the table, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop.
You said something that I've really have heard a lot over the years that I enjoy, which is how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So it's like always go the extra mile. And you said when you were washing cars, you would arrange people's CDs and tapes in alphabetical order. Not part of the job. You're just supposed to wash the car, but it ends up being this extra 10% or extra 20% that you go in every single bit that you do. And sometimes you get tips and sometimes people don't even notice, but it's not for them, right? It's for you.
And that's what I do. That's what I've done. And I saw that's the quickest way to grow out of the position. I saw, okay, when you're a youngster, you're 13 years old at the car wash, when you see the big drug dealers pull up in a Chevrolet that they invested $150K in, they not just letting anybody wash the car. They want the consistency. They want that same person. But guess what? I always told myself the day they give me that opportunity, because I'm walking up to them, I'm making eye contact, and I'm letting them know I take care of you, I got you. And the day they gave me that opportunity, not only would I wash their car, wipe it down, not only I would organize the cassettes, the CDs, and if I had the pocket change, if their gas tank was empty, I would fill up their gas tank. Because when they came back, hey, you ain't got to waste that extra 5 minutes for that. I did that for you. Big homie, it was $40. That's all I had.
I think true behavior change is identity change. And it's this shifting of your self-image, or your beliefs, or the way you look at yourself. Because it's one thing to say that I want this, and it's something very different to say I am this. So you can see how this influences you. I mean, your example there is a good one. People walk around with beliefs like that all the time. I'm not a language learner. I'm not good at math. I'm terrible with directions. I'm not good at remembering someone's name.
Yeah.
And once you have those type of, once you adopt that identity, it becomes very easy to just reinforce that over and over again. And so these three levels that you mentioned, outcomes, process, and identity, all three matter, but I think the key is that you want the direction of change to be in the right way, the right arrow. So if you start with the outcomes, if you start with the result, then you're like, oh, I really want this thing, and here's my plan for getting it. And most people just never think about the identity that comes underneath that. Like they think, I want to lose weight, or I want to be skinny, and if I follow this diet, then I'll be skinny. And then they don't really give any thought to the beliefs behind their behavior. But if you start the other way around, if you start at the identity and you say, all right, who's the type of person that could lose weight? Well, maybe it's the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. Then you start with that identity. You say, okay, I want to become the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. Here are the habits I need to build. And then whatever results come, just come naturally. So most people focus on the results and build a plan and let the identity come naturally, but that rarely works because their beliefs like conflict with your actions. But if you start with the identity and you build the habits to reinforce that, then the results just come on their own.
So if our beliefs are incongruent with what we want to happen, we're shooting ourselves in the foot consistently, right?
It's really hard. I mean, imagine two people who are trying to quit smoking. The first person, you show them a cigarette and they say, oh, no, thanks, I'm trying to quit. And the second person, you show them a cigarette and they say, oh, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker. They're both turning it down, but the first person still identifies as someone who smokes, even if it's like non-consciously. They're like, oh, I'm trying to do something that I'm not. I'm trying to quit. The second person no longer identifies as a smoker. It's not part of their identity. It's like, oh, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker. And it's much easier to take an action that is in alignment or congruent with your identity than to do something that conflicts. You might be able to do it once or twice or have the willpower to muster up and push through it.
But you need willpower every time.
In the long run, it's really hard. It's really hard to stick with the behavior that conflicts with your beliefs. Yeah, and I would say actually you probably can't do it.
I would agree with that. Because for me, to resist a cigarette, quote, I'm not even resisting it. I'm not a smoker. It's disgusting.
It doesn't bother you.
There's absolutely no. If people are smoking around me, I want to leave. I don't go, oh man, I wish I could do that right now. That's the exact opposite of
it works the same way for good habits. For many people, going to the gym feels like a sacrifice. It's like, oh, it takes hard work and effort. But there are plenty of people out there who going to the gym every week is just normal for them. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It's just like, this is just who I am.
Yeah.
And so once you've adopted a behavior as part of your identity, you're really not even pursuing behavior change anymore because you're just acting in alignment with the type of person you already believe that you are.
That makes sense. And that I had to do that with reading. I mean, people go, wow, you read so many books. And I'm like, talk to me 3 years ago and I probably read maybe 2 or 3 books in a year. Now I probably read that many in a week.
So that example right there is a good example of how this process works, which is, So if you believe that this is true, what we're saying, the natural next question is, okay, well, how do I upgrade and expand my identity then?
Right.
Like, how do I shift it so that I believe something new about myself? And this is where we come back to small habits, because it's kind of like every action you take is a vote for the type of person that you believe that you are. And so each time you do this thing, habits are how you like embody an identity, so each time you read a book, you are embodying the identity of being a reader.
Right.
Every time you go to the gym, you're embodying the identity of being a fit person. Every time you make your bed, you're embodying the identity of someone who is neat and organized. And if you embody that identity enough, if you cast enough votes for being that type of person, it's like the evidence builds up. And as that evidence accumulates, now you have a reason to believe it. And this, I think, is like a key distinction between the importance of habits and what some people say about like fake it till you make it or something like that.
Right.
Fake it till you make it is asking you to believe something about yourself without evidence, right? It's saying like, oh, just fake it and believe that. But that does not work really well for the brain, because beliefs that don't have evidence are called delusional. And so if you try to hold on to them for a long time, it doesn't work. The brain doesn't want to latch on to that. But if you can build small habits and accumulate evidence, now you have a reason to believe it, a reason for that identity to be rooted in something. And this, I think, is like ultimately one of the real reasons habits matter so much. It's true, they can get you, you can be more productive, or you can make more money, you can lose weight. Habits can give you all these things, and that's great. But the external results are just one factor. The real reason habits matter is because they provide evidence for the type of beliefs that you have about yourself. And ultimately, you can reshape your sense of self, your self-image, the person that you believe that you are, if you embody the identity enough.
So the goal isn't, and I think this is from Atomic Habits, the goal isn't to run a marathon, it's to become a runner. Right. The goal isn't to read the book. It's to become a reader, or to read 100 books.
Yeah. It's not about one single instance. It's about developing the identity of being that person.
I think a lot of people find challenging in this. That they say, well, look, I wasn't brought up to save money or invest or become savvy with real estate or to read books or to be good in school. And I heard this even yesterday with Freeway Ricky Ross. He was like, look, I bought a ton of properties before I went to jail, and then they weren't being managed well when I was inside, and I just thought, how did you not figure out how to take care of hundreds of millions of dollars somehow? How did you not just hire like one attorney to maybe manage all this? And he goes, well, my family and friends, we were not brought up to, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but he basically just went, well, these are all the people, and it's a very forgivable mistake. Those are all the people he trusted as a career criminal at that point in his life to hold on to his millions of dollars of property. He didn't want to go, hey, random white dude who I've never met, here's the keys to my kingdom. He trusted all these people that were around him, and they weren't brought up in this way. But I thought, wow, we all kind of do that at some level. Well, my whole family's really overweight, so here I am. You hear that all the time.
That's an interesting insight. I talk about this in the book when I write about social norms, but whatever tribe, we're all part of different tribes. So some of the tribes are really big, like being an American or being Australian or being French or something like that. Some of the tribes that we're part of are really big, like being an American or being French or something like that. And some of the tribes are really small, like being a member of your local neighborhood or being a member of your CrossFit gym or volunteer organization or whatever it is. But all of those tribes have a set of shared expectations and a set of like shared social norms. And habits that and behaviors in general that align with those expectations are very attractive, and we want to do them. And habits that conflict with those are very unattractive. And so, like in that case, it's possible that reaching out to somebody else outside of the tribe would have been a violation of trust in a certain way. And so that's not an attractive thing to do.
Right.
And that we all experience that to varying degrees. And so it's hard to figure out the best solution to that. But you need to constantly be assessing your current tribe and think about whether it aligns with the habits that you want to build.
What about this habit loop that you've got here? We hinted about it, I think, in the very beginning with cues. This really is like I don't know what you'd call it. This is the roadmap to habit creation, or the roadmap to how habits work.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to build when I put it together. So a lot of people are familiar with Duhigg's habit loop from Power of Habit, or cue, routine, reward. And that actually kind of had its origins in the 1930s. B.F. Skinner had the stimulus response reward model. He's this famous psychologist. But Anyway, that is a good example of the external influences on behavior, which we talked about earlier. But we need to account for the internal influences as well. And so my model has 4 stages. So first, there's a cue. There's some bit of information that you come across. Second, there's what I call a craving, which is really the prediction that you make about the cue. And I'll give you an example in a second. Third, there's the response, so the actual habit itself or the behavior that follows. I think this model works for not only habits, but most human behaviors. And then fourth, there's some kind of result, which I would call the reward. There's a benefit that comes from doing the behavior, how it serves you. And these 4 stages form a feedback loop. And if you repeat them enough, then a habit becomes ingrained, or behavior you can do more or less automatically. And it's really what we're describing is really the process of learning. It's how you learn a new behavior, how you learn a habit. So let me give you an example. If you walk into a kitchen and you see a plate of cookies, see the plate of cookies, that's a visual cue. Next, your brain makes an interpretation, a prediction, and we call that the craving. So it's like, oh, the cookies are going to taste good, so I should go eat them. Then you have the response, you eat the cookie, and then the reward is it's tasty, it's sugary, whatever. And so that closes the feedback loop and teaches you, hey, next time you see a cookie, you should eat it again because it's tasty.
Right.
But you can just as easily imagine a scenario where, let's say you were eating in the other room and you just finished dinner, you just had 3 cookies, you're full, you walk in, you see another plate of them in the kitchen, and now your interpretation is different. You see the same cue, but you're like, oh, I'm stuffed, I don't want to eat anything. So different interpretation or different prediction. And so now you avoid the cookies, you don't eat anymore, the response is different, outcome is different. And so that's where we account for kind of this internal state. Your internal state determines how you interpret the cue, which then leads to the response. And so that's how we kind of both get the external and the internal influence in this model.
And everyone does this. If you can't think of an example, if the cookies aren't clear enough for you, light switches, phones.
Yeah, let's say you walk into a room, it's dark. That's the cue. You want to be able to see, craving, there's some kind of prediction. You reach for the light switch and flip it on, response, you can see, reward. So, I mean, that happens in half a second, and you do it all the time anytime you walk into a dark room.
Right.
This loop is like endlessly running. And you're doing this without even thinking about it, right? You're building habits all the time. Depending on the study you look at, habits account for 40 to 50% of our behaviors on any given day. And this is all stuff like...
And does that mean like anything that we do, basically?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, tying your shoes or flipping on the light switch or unplugging the toaster after each use. Like stuff that you don't even think about all the time. You're always using it.
Do you unplug the toaster after each use?
My wife does.
I do too. And I can't remember why I started doing that, which is like such a random and perfect example because I thought... Other people unplug the toaster, huh? I thought we were the only weirdos that unplug the toaster.
I did a lot of research for the book, and I tried to find a lot of examples that were things like that.
Yeah.
People feel like, wait, I thought I was the only one that does that. But
totally
really
thought weird.
Yeah.
And I remember like maybe I saw it in the instruction manual for the toaster, and it's like, hey, there's no off button. You just have to unplug it. And
but then you have to admit to being the type of person who reads the instruction
for
manual for a toaster.
Yeah, that's true. Jen, do you have any idea why we unplug the toaster after each use? Yeah, we don't know.
No clue.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, but it is endlessly running.
Yeah.
And so you're always, and again, in a way, what I'm describing is the process of learning. And so the brain is always learning based on what experience you're going through next, and then it updates its predictions and approaches the next time around based on your past experiences and your current situation. And when the situations repeat themselves, when you kind of come across the same context again and again, then you end up forming a habit because you come up with the same solutions over and over.
You've said in Fearvana, or at least in one of our conversations, that the single greatest barrier that stands in the way of our well-being is our negative relationship to suffering. So that essentially means what? That you enjoy, at some level, suffering, which is no surprise. I mean, that's like what you're known for. Is like, whenever I get a message from you, I'm like, what weird-ass thing is he going to do today to cause more pain? Yeah, but you're right. We do demonize fear, stress, anxiety. I mean, half the books that come out now are like, love every second of your work.
And it's nonsense. Yeah, that idea that if you love what you do, you'll never feel like a day of work in your life.
Right.
That's garbage. I mean, I love what I do. I'm sure you love what you do.
Yeah.
But there's days where it's work. It sucks.
Every day. Yeah, pretty much.
It sucks sometimes. And that's okay, though. But like these words like fear, stress, anxiety, guilt, suffering, pain, adversity, we have such a negative relationship. Nobody hears those words and think of them as positive things or positive experiences. But you cannot transform. You cannot evolve without suffering. You have to put your, it's like working out. You put your body through physical stress in order to grow. Yes, you temper it with recovery, but it's the same thing with the mind and spirit. You put it yourself through psychological stress, through spiritual stress in order to evolve. But yet, yeah, so many people are like, love what you do. Everything should be easy. We live in a world that's feeding the garbage about the easiest, quickest path to getting what you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything that I rail about. I mean, even you and I have talked about this before, where I'm like, these people on these influencers, they're selling get rich quick, or they're selling this like business in a box, and it's like such BS.
Oh my God.
But people are going for that, and I mean, the first thing I remember learning from my parents was if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I mean, this is like the first slogan. I probably heard that when I was 8 or 7 or younger. And now as adults, it's like so tempting. Somehow half of our friends are doing this.
Yeah, and we're conditioned by it too, right? Because our world, we have a little dopamine machines. So we're constantly taught that we can get instant gratification everywhere.
Yeah.
Watch a movie instantly, get something on 2 days, in Prime, it'll be there to your door. So we're constantly taught that by our environment.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for it in every way. And everything is feeding that, but it's kind of missing the point. The value is not the $1 million or the 6-pack abs or anything of the result. It's the person you become on that journey. And you're missing the point if you're trying to get there as fast as possible. Because the suffering that you go through to get there, that will be the change that happens. That will be the thing that transforms you.
Yeah,
where you grow.
That's a good point. It's kind of like you have to work out in order to get strong. You can't just inject steroids and watch Netflix. Tried that, didn't work out. Just ended up with a bunch of cholesterol and giant biceps. No, but like the idea that you would even try to do that in another area of your life makes no sense. Because my next question, which I accidentally answered for myself, was, well, if life is giving us stress, anxiety, and all that, why should I dive headfirst into it? Because I'm already getting enough from life. But that's kind of like saying, well, when you walk outside and you lift your equipment case into your car, isn't that the same thing as going to the gym and lifting weights? And the answer is no, of course it's not.
Yeah.
You want to turn it up to 11 or to 8 so that when you're at a 5, you're fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It conditions you to handle the normal stressors of life. And it's also not about seeking suffering for the sake of suffering.
Well, except in your case, apparently.
Except as many ways as possible. But when I mentioned with the drug addiction, I used to cut myself. I still have scars on my arm just cutting myself. I have a burn here on my arm from taking a cigar, burning myself back in when I was on drugs.
What kind of drugs were you doing?
Cocaine, lots of LSD. Lots of LSD, lots of cocaine. And I was actually at a point that I would have done any drug that came my way.
Okay.
Like everything I do, I was the one, pushing the line. Thankfully, more did not come my way, and they started to come in by the time I stopped. By the time I changed and stopped doing drugs. But I would have done PCP, I would have gone down the Special K, I would have done anything, heroin. Like, I was looking for it.
Jeez.
Thankfully, it did not, because it could have, I have 2 friends who OD'd and died from that phase of my life I was in, So there was no virtue to this pain. So you got to find I do ultra running. I spent 7 days in darkness. I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but find your own. I call it the worthy struggle. Like, what's that struggle worthy of who you are and who you want to be for the world and for yourself? Seek that out. And in that, you'll find beauty. There's bliss even in pain. Like, when I'm running 72 miles or spending 7 days in darkness, there's without a doubt moments where I'm like, this sucks. Why am I here? This is awful. I don't want to be here.
Yeah, I was talking with Dean Karnazes a while ago, and he was talking about how when you guys are on these runs, do you guys know each other?
He actually got me into ultra running.
Okay.
His book, Ultra Marathon Man, I read it when I was in Iraq. Crazily enough, and we didn't have a lot of time because we were infantry Marines out the wire doing crazy stuff every day. But whenever I did have time, I would run for like 3-4 hours around this tiny little base in the middle of Iraq. And Ultra Marathon Man was the trigger that inspired me. And I reached out to him after sharing my story, and thankfully he wrote a little thing for Fearvana. So he's awesome. I
can just see these
Dean.
Insurgents looking at you, and they're like, "Don't go." They're crazy. This guy's been running in a circle for 7 hours. Like, let's go get the other base. I don't want this guy running after me. He'll never stop. But yeah, Dean, he was talking about how on some of his 100-mile desert runs, he'll shit himself and just keep going. You guys are wired in this weird way where it's like that's just part of the game.
Yeah, it's horrible, going through that. Like, I've had, bloody shits when I'm gone long. I ran 80 miles around a 0.2 mile loop a few months ago. 0.2 mile loop.
Wait, how many laps does that work out to?
400 laps.
That's so ridiculous.
Nightmarishly psychological torture, right?
Yeah. Because at least when you're running through Liberia, there's like a village over there and a river down. No, just a track.
This is this track. And I think it was maybe 60 miles in, I started shitting blood and just was like, all right, suck it up.
But there's no point, there's no part where you're like, red line, literally in this case, I better go to the doctor.
So in that case, because I was actually planning a 46-hour run, because I had work to do the next day, I had a presentation to do. I was like, I can't afford to go to the hospital.
No, and you can't afford to shit blood during a presentation. Like,
So eventually I tempered it.
there's a couple ways to not get invited back to Google.
Yeah,
And that is one of them.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you find the line to temper. But I have been in the hospital before for heat exhaustion and had to get IVs and stuff.
That seems pretty standard for the stuff that you're doing. Yeah.
happens.
My goodness. So you want to fall in love with the demons, fall in love with the darkness, and confront them but is this not just like another way of cutting yourself to just see if you can do it? I mean, because to me it sounds horrible. To you it sounds horrible also. But then you're like, ooh, but I want to do that. But I'm not like, ooh, I'm gonna go get drunk and cut myself. And I'm not making fun of you. I'm just saying, like, this seems like you're searching out pain. It's just that this way is more socially acceptable because people go, what a badass. Whereas if you're cutting your arm, people go, dude, you need psychological help. But I'm looking at you running around a track 400 times, shitting blood, and not going to and being like, maybe you do need also to go to therapy as a result.
I have had therapists tell me that I'm. One therapist told me that I have a mental disorder, or that I'm something about how I'm psychologically flawed and mental disorder, and he told me that I was pretty messed up, which is
It's like a very masochistic thing, though.
Yeah,
like,
but I mean, I think that,
really?
like now, well, compared to, let's say, cutting myself, the pain that I earn in long distance running, I earn that pain. So I work, like I'm running 8-9 hours to earn that pain. There's a virtue to it. There's a spiritual seeking I'm getting out of it. This is almost a shortcut even to pain, cutting my arm.
That's
right?
like the steroids of...
exactly.
Yeah.
Now it's like I'm seeking, there's a purpose to it, there's a virtue to it. I tell a story around it. I share, it inspires other people. I've had some people at my talks who were overweight tell me the first time that they started hiking and lost all this weight. So there's a virtue to it that allows me to transcend myself and serve others with it as well.
Sure.
But ultimately, the engaging the darkness is, because we all have different versions of the darkness, right? Some people have, I mean, we've all gone through different things in life, but everybody suffered in some way. Their degrees or whatever, is irrelevant, and ultimately, we've all suffered. And so the point is, though, if you don't engage those dark spaces, they're going to hold you back. You can't really become that highest imagined version of yourself until you confront that deepest, darkest version of yourself. You know, there's that saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Yeah.
It's the same way. We are only as strong as that weakest link within ourselves. But nobody wants to confront that because it's hard. It is terrifying going into those spaces to confront that weak link, to confront that demon. But Carl Jung, one of my favorite quotes of all time, he says that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious.
So James Carse, a philosopher who used to teach at NYU for many years, he's 87 now. He's an amazing guy. He theorized in 1986. He wrote a little book about these two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Baseball, football. There's a beginning, middle, and end. The goal is to win, and if there's a winner, there has to be a loser, right? Then you have an infinite game. An infinite game is defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, which means you can play however you want. There's no referees. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives. These are games that have no finish line, right? There's no agreed upon metrics. There's no agreed upon rules. There's no agreed upon timeframes. There's no such thing as winners and losers. Like, you can't be the winner in your marriage. You can definitely be the loser, but you cannot be the winner.
Yeah, good point.
There's no such thing as winning career. Like, no one is declared the winner of careers. Right? There's no such thing as winning global politics, and there's no such thing as winning business. There's no winner of business, right? But if we listen to people, they talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition. Based on what?
Right.
Well, we're number one, based on the metrics and the timeframes of your own choosing.
Yeah.
And even if you are number one, you're only number one for now, right? It doesn't last, right? Because it's an infinite game. There's no finish line.
Right.
The game just keeps going and going. And so when we view the other players as competitors, it's a finite mindset, because that means we want to beat them, because that's what competitors are for, right? I want to be the winner. I want them to be the loser, right? Which is very unhealthy in games that have no finish lines, like our careers, like in business, because what ends up happening is we look for shortcuts. Our perspective becomes shorter and shorter time frames. And it ends up hurting trust, cooperation, and innovation.
You know, people will sacrifice their integrity to get ahead short term, but then it's like, well, you have to keep doing it.
Yeah, or you make a substandard product or the rest of it. You know, and we see it play it out all the time. You know, we're seeing it playing out right now with Boeing, right? That was nothing short of short-term pressure that made them make some stupid decisions. right? They were obsessed with making their numbers rather than obsessed with making the safest airplane in the sky.
Terrifying. Yeah.
Right? No, it is terrifying,
Yeah.
but that's how it plays out. And it's a whole series of events that take place, including ethical fading and all the rest of it, where pressure put on somebody, put pressure put on somebody, put pressure on somebody, adding in unhealthy incentive structures, you end up with decisions being made all over the place that allow for this to happen. Leaders are responsible for that environment. So the buck does stop somewhere, and that's at the top.
Is it the leader responsible for the environment, or is it like hashtag capitalism?
No,
Right.
it's not hashtag capitalism.
Okay,
That's
good.
that's absolutely nonsense.
I agree.
There's nothing wrong with capitalism. There is something wrong with the form of capitalism that we practice now.
Mm-hmm.
Capitalism, as Adam Smith envisioned it, is the capitalism that Thomas Jefferson believed in, which is the capitalism that made America what it is today. It's only since about the 1970s that this form of capitalism capitalism has become bastardized. Capitalism has always been about the people. It's always been about the consumer, right? It's only recently, since the late 1970s, a theory was proposed of shareholder supremacy, which was popularized in the 80s and 90s by people like Jack Welch, the CEO of GE. That's a new idea, shareholder supremacy. Adam Smith could never have imagined that. The idea of putting profit before a human being, that's a new idea.
Yeah.
The idea of using mass layoffs to balance the books on a regular basis didn't exist prior to the 1980s. And all these didn't exist.
Huh.
So all of these insane ideas like rank and yank, where you promote the top 10% of performers and fire the bottom 10% every year, these are new ideas that were really popularized and promoted in the boom years of the 80s and 90s. So people are blaming capitalism, which is incorrect. It's this form of capitalism that I think is the problem. And the champions of this form of capitalism, like Jack Welch, and his disciples, that is the problem. But capitalism isn't the problem, it's the form of capitalism. So the concept of viewing other companies or other individuals as competitors is really unhealthy. I mean, if you have a competitor at work, that means you will undermine them so that you can improve your sales numbers so you can get the bonus. That's insane. You work for the same organization. And some companies, some leaders actually promote internal competition,
For sure.
which is really bad for the organization. So I like the term rival, right? And some of the rivals are worthy of comparison. They're worthy rivals. And a worthy rival is another player in the game whose strengths reveal to you your weaknesses, right? In other words, they're really good at something that makes you so uncomfortable, sometimes even angry, that you want to beat them, that you hate them sometimes. You have visceral responses. But in reality, it's because they're revealing something uncomfortable, and it's easier to take that uncomfortable energy and direct it at them rather than looking at yourself, right? We've all had the experience where somebody we worked with at work got a promotion and we got mad.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. We're getting angry at somebody else's good fortune.
Yeah.
We're like, what is it about that person that is touching a nerve inside us, right? That's a worthy rival. And the whole point of worthy rivalry is to recognize these people. You don't have to like them, you don't have to agree with them, but you have to respect them. To recognize these other people or organizations, because their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses, and our opportunity is to look at our weaknesses and build on them, to work on them. In other words, it's a self-improvement exercise as individuals or as organizations. And there are always other players in the game who are better than you. Always.
Well, yeah, ideally. Otherwise, you're really wasting your time.
And because you get to pick your own worthy rivals, if you just pick people that you constantly outperform, well, then you're going to get caught totally by surprise because someone will come and swoop in, right? So I love this idea of the worthy rival. And you asked at the top of the show about, the other people, am I intimidated, or am I competitive with some of the other remarkable
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
folks out there. And we were talking about Ken Robinson, and the answer is no. I learned from them. If I had a finite mindset, I'd want to compete with them. I want to get more gigs than them. I want to get higher profile gigs than them. I want to do more TED Talks. I want more views, right? Based on what? I can be all high and mighty about myself because I got more Instagram followers than they do. Well, they got 4 times more Twitter followers than I do. Like, what's the correct metric?
Right.
It's ridiculous. The whole thing is a fool's errand. You just drive yourself nuts. Right? And you can either make yourself feel proud because you only look at the ones where you're ahead, or you make yourself depressed because you only look at the ones that you're behind. And the answer is, it doesn't matter. Which is, what are they doing that's better than you, that you have an opportunity to push your own game, to advance yourself? It's self-improvement. So I would much rather view the other players in the game as worthy rivals rather than competitors.
That makes sense. I noticed that before, you'd mentioned, or in the book you mentioned, we can select these people strategically. And that I think it's simple, but most people don't do that. They just kind of look at whoever's in their orbit or whoever sits next to them in the office or whoever's getting accolades that day. And that's really unhealthy, because if I'm just looking at whoever is showing up in my Instagram feed, it's a constant ass kicking that I'm giving myself.
Well,
right?
Not only that, we don't know how they're doing it, right? I know for a fact, because I get to see behind the scenes, that there are people who game the Amazon and New York Times bestseller list.
For sure.
Right? You can pay for a company to make you a New York Times bestseller. It's doable. And if you look at the numbers behind the scenes, you can see the ones who are doing it. I know some of the names. I'm not going to say a word.
Right, of course.
Right?
Yeah. I wouldn't. It's not that kind of show.
Well, it's just I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? Or Instagram. Amazon. You know, the number of emails I get that say, "Hey, everybody, can you all please buy my book at this same time?" You know, we try and buy it because Amazon calculates it, I think, hourly. And so if you get all your friends to buy your book in the same hour, you can become number one in a category.
And then you screenshot it, go home.
And then for the rest of time, you're in Amazon number one bestseller, you know? Or you get all your friends to write fake reviews to drive your stars up, because more stars means more book sales, right? There's millions of ways to game the system. And so if I'm comparing myself to people who are gaming the system, so I'm getting all insecure because I think that they're better than me, but they're built on a house of cards anyway.
Right. They're better than you at emailing all their friends at the same time, or whatever.
So you have to be a little bit cynical even when you make the comparisons, which is we don't actually know how people achieve their success. You know, some of them, you know, the ones that I admire are the ones that I like them. I admire their work, I admire their message, but there's a consistency. Like they're able to do it on a regular basis. And when you meet them in person, when you see them on a stage, like they show up as exactly how you see them, you know, on a video or something. And there's an authenticity to it. And I those are the ones I respect. Those are the ones I choose to make myself a worthy rival with. Those are the ones I choose to compare my craft with their craft. And they're the ones who push me to be a better version of whatever I'm doing.
For people watching and listening, how do we select healthy rivals in a healthy way? How do we select worthy rivals in a healthy way? Right? You kind of touched on this, but I would love some sort of prescriptive if you can.
My rule of thumb is the ones that make you uncomfortable. You know, like you hear their name and you go, you know, or somebody mentions the other company and you go, well, let me tell you the truth. You know, we sort of, let me tell you how they do it.
Right.
You know, the ones who their names constantly come up, you know, in your category, and literally you like your fingernails are grinding the, if there's an emotional response, they're probably touching a nerve for a reason. Sometimes it's because they're worthy rivals. Not always. But I think that's a good rule of thumb.
There's an introspection to be had here, because there's definitely people where I go, all right, this person's a worthy rival because they show me that I should be reaching out for bigger names or better equipment.
Oh no, that's not it. That's not how worthy rivalry. No. Worthy rivalry isn't. You don't pick worthy rivals because their numbers are better than yours. That's the finite mindset, because we're comparing metric to metric.
Right.
And there are arbitrary selections. No. That's a worthy rival we compare because their marketing is better than ours, or they're the gold standard. Like if you're in the airline business, you really should be, Southwest Airlines should definitely be one of your worthy rivals, because everybody talks about and writes about Southwest Airlines. You'd be insane to ignore that they're doing something right. You don't have to do it the way that they do it, but you have to pay attention that they're doing something. You have to learn from them, right? If you're in the smartphone business, we cannot ignore the iPhone. You just can't ignore it. Now, is it as incredible as it used to be? That's debatable. but what got us here, there's something pretty remarkable about that. So it's, Netflix. If you're in the TV or movie business, you have to be looking at Netflix, not by their numbers or their market caps or anything like this, but there's something that they're doing that made them the gold standard. There's something that they're doing that everybody uses them as the benchmark. They should definitely be a worthy rival.